The scream cut through the market noise before I even saw where it came from. I was walking back from my shift at the dock, tired, hungry, thinking about nothing but food and sleep. Halden Station was loud that hour, the way it always was when 3 shifts crossed paths at once. Traders shouting prices, engines humming under the floor plates, 100 different languages folding into each other. I almost missed the sound. Almost. It came again, sharper this time, from the narrow walkway between 2 cargo units where the station lights never quite reached. I stopped walking. Something in my chest pulled tight, the way it used to when I was still in uniform, and a bad feeling meant something real. I turned into the alley. 3 men stood in a loose half-circle. Big men, station dockers by the look of their jackets, the kind who worked cargo lifts all day and thought that gave them the right to take up whatever space they wanted. In the middle of their circle was a child, not human, small, thin-limbed, with pale gray skin that seemed to catch what little light there was. Kelverin, I realized. I had seen a few of them around the station, always with adults, always well-dressed, always kept close. This one was alone. She could not have been more than 7 years old in human years, though I had no real way to know how Kelverin aging worked. She wore a torn collar around her neck, the translator kind, cracked down the middle so it hung useless and dark. She could not call for help in any language the humans around her would understand. She could only make sounds. Small, frightened sounds. One of the men grabbed her arm. I did not decide to move. My body simply moved, the way it had moved 100 times before, in situations I no longer wanted to remember. I crossed the distance between us before I had even finished thinking about it. "Let her go," I said. The man with his hand on her arm turned first. He was broad through the shoulders, with a scar along his jaw and eyes that had already decided I was a problem before I finished my sentence. "This isn't your business," he said. "Walk away." "She's a kid," I said. "Doesn't matter whose business it is." The second man laughed, low and ugly. "You know what she is? You know what her kind did to half the cargo routes on this station. Prices go up, we go hungry, and you want to protect one of their brats." I did not answer that. There was no answer that would matter to men who had already made up their minds about who deserved protecting and who did not. I stepped between them and the child instead, close enough that she pressed herself against the back of my legs, shaking. "You've got about 3 seconds to walk away," the scarred man said. "So do you," I said. He didn't take them. I felt the first hit before I saw it coming, a fist against my ribs that drove the air out of me and folded me half over. I kept my footing, barely. The second man grabbed my arm to spin me around, and I let him, because turning meant the child stayed behind me instead of beside me. That was the only thing I was thinking about. Not winning, not fighting back the way I had been trained to, just staying between them and her, no matter what it cost. It cost a lot. I will not describe every part of what happened next. It does not need describing. What matters is this. I curled myself around that small shaking body, and I did not let go. No matter how many times I was struck, no matter how many times the ground came up to meet me. There is a kind of stillness that comes over you when your only job is to not move, to not give an inch, to make your own back into a wall between danger and someone who cannot protect themselves. I found that stillness in the dirt of that alley, and I held on to it. At some point the child stopped shaking. I remember that. She had gone very quiet, very small, tucked into the space beneath my arm, and I remember thinking, through the ringing in my ears, that at least she was safe there. At least that much was true. I do not know how long it lasted. Time does strange things when you are not fighting to win, only fighting to endure. I heard shouting, not from the men above me but from somewhere further off, voices that were not human, sharp and fast and full of alarm. I heard footsteps running. I heard the men above me swear and scatter, boots hitting the metal decking as they fled into the crowd. And then there was quiet. I did not move right away. Moving hurt in ways I did not want to catalog. I stayed curled around the child a moment longer, checking with what was left of my strength that she was still there, still breathing, still whole. She was. Small hands had found the front of my jacket at some point and were gripping it so tightly I could feel it through the ache in my chest. "You're okay," I said, though I doubted she understood the words. "You're okay now." Footsteps arrived close, quick and light, nothing like the heavy boots that had run away. I looked up as much as I could manage and saw her. She was tall, taller than any human I had ever stood beside, with the same pale gray skin as the child, though hers seemed to shimmer faintly, catching the alley light in a way that made her look almost lit from within. Her eyes found the child first, and something in her face that had been rigid with fear cracked open into something closer to grief and relief at once. Then her eyes moved to me. I do not know what she saw. A stranger, bloodied, curled protectively around her daughter, still holding on even though the danger had already passed. I could not read her expression. I did not have the context for it. But I remember the way she went still, the way her breath caught, the way she looked at me not like someone assessing a threat, but like someone trying to understand something that did not fit inside anything she already knew. "Tavi," she said, and the word broke in the middle, half a name and half a sound of pure relief. The child let go of my jacket and reached for her mother instead, and I let my arms fall open, releasing the small weight I had been holding on to through all of it. The mother gathered her up in one motion, pulling her close, pressing her face into her daughter's hair as if she needed to confirm with her whole body that this was real, that she was whole, that she had not lost her. Then she looked at me again. I tried to speak. Nothing useful came out. My vision had started doing something strange, tilting slightly at the edges, the way it does right before your body decides it has had enough and wants to stop being upright for a while. I heard her say something, quick and urgent, not to me, to someone else nearby, a voice I had not noticed arriving. Station security, maybe, or something else. The last thing I remember clearly is her hand, cool against the side of my face, steadying my head as the world tipped sideways beneath me. Her eyes were the last thing I saw before the dark folded over everything. Not fear in them anymore, not grief either. Something else, something I would spend a long time afterward trying to understand. I did not choose to be a hero that night. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for everything that came after. I did not think about consequences, or rewards, or what kind of story this would become. I only knew that a child was afraid, and alone, and that I could put myself between her and whatever was coming. Everything else was decided for me by whatever part of a person decides these things before thought ever gets involved. I did not know, lying there on the cold decking with the sound of running feet fading into the distance, that I had just changed the entire shape of my life. I did not know that the woman kneeling over me, her hand steady against my bruised face, belonged to a people who measured debts in ways no human system ever had. I did not know that somewhere in the days ahead, gratitude would turn into something far larger, far stranger, and far more permanent than I could have imagined in that alley. All I knew, as the darkness finally took me, was that the child was safe. That was enough. That had always been enough. The rest of it, I would have to learn the hard way. I woke to a ceiling I did not recognize. It was smooth and pale, curved slightly at the edges, with a soft light built into the surface itself, rather than hanging from it. For a moment I thought I might still be dreaming, because the pain that should have greeted me was dulled to a distant ache instead of the sharp fire I expected. Something in the air smelled faintly sweet, almost like crushed herbs, though I could not place it. I tried to sit up and a hand pressed gently against my shoulder, keeping me down. "Not yet," a voice said. Careful English, softened by an accent I had not heard before. Each word placed with deliberate precision, as if she were translating from somewhere else in her mind even as she spoke. "Your body needs more time." I turned my head and found her sitting beside the bed, the mother from the alley. Up close, in better light, I could see her more clearly than I had through the haze of pain the night before. Her skin held a faint shimmer, like something caught between silver and gray, and her eyes were a deep violet that seemed to hold more depth than human eyes ever did. She wore simple clothing, dark and well-made, with no jewelry or decoration except a thin band around one wrist that pulsed faintly, like something alive. "Where am I?" I asked. My voice came out rough, unused. "Safe," she said. "My home. I did not think it wise to leave you where those men might find you again, or where Station Medical might ask questions you would not want to answer." I thought about that. She was not wrong. Station Medical asked a lot of questions when you came in looking the way I must have looked, and I did not have good answers for most of them. "The girl," I said. "Tavi, is she?" "She is well," the mother said, and something in her voice caught slightly on the words, like a stone dropped into still water. "Frightened, bruised in places, but well. She is sleeping now, in the next room. She asked for you before she slept." Something loosened in my chest at that. I had not realized how much weight I had still been carrying until it was gone. "I'm glad," I said, and meant it more than I had meant almost anything in a long time. She was quiet for a moment, studying me in a way that made me feel like a puzzle she was trying to solve. "You do not know who I am," she said finally. It was not quite a question. "No," I admitted. "Should I?" "Perhaps not," she said. "My name is Stori Vantik. I hold a seat among the Kelverin Council here on this station. My work involves trade agreements between our people and yours, among other things." She paused. "Tavi is my daughter, my only child." I let that settle. A council seat explained the room I was lying in, the quality of the medical care that had clearly been used on me while I slept, the quiet authority in the way she carried herself, even sitting still in a chair. It did not explain the look on her face, though, the one that had not changed since I woke. "You saved her," Stori said. "You saw a child who was not your own, who was not even your own kind, in danger, and you placed your body between her and harm without hesitation. You did not run. You did not call for others to handle it. You endured what came, alone, until it was done." "Anyone would have done the same," I said, and I believed it when I said it. Her expression shifted, something sharp moving behind her eyes. "No," she said. "They would not have. I have lived a long time among many kinds of people, human and otherwise, and what you did last night is rare among every species I have known. Rarer still when there is nothing to be gained by it." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. "Among my people," she continued, "there is something we understand deeply, something woven into how we raise our children and structure our families. A Kelverin adult cannot shield a child from harm the way you did. It is not a matter of unwillingness. It is a matter of our bodies, our biology. We are not built to absorb harm the way yours are. When danger comes for our children, we can only remove them from it, or call for help, or use what tools we have. We cannot simply stand between them and the blow and take it onto ourselves instead. It is not in us to survive that the way you survived it." I frowned, trying to follow. "So when you saw me, I saw something I had only heard described in old stories," she said quietly. "A person choosing, freely, without call of blood or duty, to place their own body as the last line between a child and harm. And enduring it, not for reward, not for recognition, simply because it was needed, and you were there, and you could." There was a weight in the room now that had not been there a moment before. I shifted against the pillows, uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with my bruises. "I don't understand what you're telling me," I said honestly. "I did what anyone should do. Where I come from, that's not supposed to be rare. It's supposed to be normal." "Perhaps where you come from," Stori said, "it should be normal. I have not found it to be so, anywhere, among any people. But that is not the difficulty I need to speak with you about." Something in her tone made me go still. "Among the Kelverin," she said slowly, choosing each word with visible care, "there exists a very old law, older than the council, older than our arrival among the stars. It concerns what happens when someone outside our bloodline saves the life of a Kelverin child at true cost to themselves. It is not invoked lightly. It has not been invoked in my lifetime, nor in my mother's lifetime. But it exists, and it is binding, and it does not care whether the one who invokes it wished to be found by it." What kind of law? I asked, though some part of me already sensed I would not like the answer. A debt, she said. Not a debt of money. A debt of self. When a Kelverin child's life is saved through such a sacrifice, the family of that child owes the one who saved her a bond that cannot be repaid through ordinary means. It must be repaid through connection, through presence, through what your language might clumsily call belonging. I felt my stomach tighten. Belonging to what? To us, Stori said. To the family that owes you. It is called the HFY, the protector's claim, though claim is the wrong word for it in your tongue, because it suggests ownership, and that is not what this is. It is closer to a binding of households, a permanent place within the family that was saved. Once it is formally accepted, it cannot be undone, not by distance, not by time, not by either party changing their mind afterward. I stared at her. You're telling me I'm supposed to become part of your family, forever, because I stopped some men from hurting your daughter. I am telling you that our law believes you already have a claim to that place, she said. Whether you accept it is another matter entirely. I would not force this on you. I would not want a bond built on obligation instead of will, but I needed you to understand what you stepped into, in that alley, without knowing it, and I needed to tell you, before anyone else in my community learns what happened and begins to expect it of both of us. I lay back against the pillows, staring up at that smooth, pale ceiling, trying to make sense of a night that had started with nothing more complicated than walking home hungry and tired. What happens if I say no? I asked. Then you say no, Stori said simply. You return to your life. Tavi and I remain grateful to you for as long as we live, and we find some other way to honor what you did, one that does not ask so much of you. No one will force the HFY upon a person who does not choose it. That is not how it works. That is not how I would allow it to work, even if it were. There was something steady in the way she said that, something that made me believe her. She was not trying to trap me. She was trying to warn me, and to give me a choice before the weight of her people's expectations arrived and made the choice feel smaller than it should. And if I say yes, I said, mostly to myself. Sorad's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had woken up, I saw something besides gratitude and careful explanation in her expression, something quieter, something that looked almost like hope, guarded carefully behind a wall of formality. Then you would never again be a stranger passing through our lives, she said. You would be family, truly, completely, for as long as either of us drew breath. Tavi would have you as kin, not as a memory of one frightening night. And she stopped herself, composing whatever she had been about to say into something more careful. I would be glad of it, she finished simply, more glad than my position allows me to easily admit. The door at the far side of the room creaked open before I could respond, and a small gray face peered around the edge of it, violet eyes wide and searching until they found me on the bed. Tavi did not wait for permission. She crossed the room in a rush and climbed up beside me with the fearless certainty only children seem to carry, curling into my side the same way she had curled beneath my arm in that alley, as though the space had already been claimed for her. You came back, she said, in careful, halting English, the words clearly newly learned or newly remembered from whatever education a diplomat's daughter received. I thought maybe you would not come back. I looked down at her small hand already gripping my sleeve, then up at Stori, who was watching the two of us with an expression I did not yet have the words to describe. I'm not going anywhere, I said, and even as I said it, I understood that the words meant something far larger now than they would have meant a day before. Stori did not push me for an answer that night. She let the question sit between us, unhurried, while Tavi fell asleep against my side, and the pale light of that unfamiliar room dimmed slowly towards something like evening. But I could feel the shape of the decision waiting for me, patient and enormous, and I knew that whatever I chose, my life had already turned a corner it would not be turning back from. 3 weeks passed before I gave Stori my answer, and in those 3 weeks, my life quietly rearranged itself without asking my permission. I went back to my apartment on the lower ring of the station the day after I woke, still sore, still moving carefully, and found it exactly as I had left it. Small, cluttered, smelling faintly of engine grease from my work clothes. It felt strange to be back there after the quiet, spacious calm of Soray's home. Stranger still to realize how much I missed the sound of Tavi's laughter already, only one day removed from it. My friend Owen Bryce noticed something was different the moment I limped into the dock office for my shift. "You look like you got run over by a cargo loader," he said, setting down his tool bag to get a better look at the fading bruises along my jaw. "And you've got that face, the one you get when something's happened that you haven't figured out how to talk about yet." Owen and I had worked the same dock for 4 years. He knew my faces better than most people knew my name. "Helped a kid out of a bad situation," I said, which was true and simple and left out everything that mattered. That explained the bruises. Some of them. He studied me a long moment, the way he did when he suspected there was more to a story and had decided not to push for it yet. "Well," he said finally, "whatever happened, you're walking, so I'll take that as a win. Grab your kit, shift starting." I worked that day, and the day after, and the days after that, my body slowly returning to itself while my mind stayed somewhere else entirely. I kept thinking about the pale room and the quiet way Stori had explained a law that could rewrite the entire shape of my life, and the small warm weight of a child who had climbed into the space beside me as though it already belonged to her. Soraya did not contact me during that time. I understood later that this had been deliberate, a kind of respect built into how she handled the offer she had made me, a refusal to pressure or hurry a decision that was supposed to be freely given or not given at all. But Tavi had no such patience, and no real understanding of why she should wait. She found me on the 7th day, standing at the edge of the lower ring's public garden deck during my break, staring out at the false sky the station projected to make the lower levels feel less like a metal box floating in the dark. I heard small footsteps first, then felt a hand slip into mine without any warning at all. "Hello," Tavi said, looking pleased with herself for having found me. I looked around quickly, half expecting a security detail, or at least Stori herself, but there was only Tavi, dressed in simple clothes instead of anything that marked her as a counselor's daughter, her translator collar repaired now and resting properly around her neck. "Does your mother know you're here?" I asked. "She knows I am visiting the garden," Tavi said, which was, I suspected, a very careful and very deliberate answer that told me everything about how much freedom a 7-year-old could negotiate out of a busy diplomat. "I wanted to see you. You have not visited." "I didn't want to intrude," I said. "Your mother gave me time to think." "About the HFY," Tavi said, saying the words with the easy familiarity of someone who had grown up hearing them, even if she did not fully understand their weight. "Mother explained it to me. She said you might say yes, or you might say no, and either way I should not be sad, because you already did the important part in the alley." Something in my chest tightened at the plain honesty of that, the way only children seem able to deliver difficult truths without flinching from them. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her, mostly because I was curious what a 7-year-old made of a decision this size. Tavi considered the question with the same seriousness she seemed to bring to everything. "I think," she said slowly, "that you already stayed with me when it was hard. When those men were hurting you, and you could have let go and run away, you did not. You stayed. That is what the HFY asks for too, I think. Just staying, even when it is hard." I did not have an answer for that. I only squeezed her small hand and looked back out at the false sky, and something in me that had been circling the decision for a week finally settled into place. I found Soray's office 2 days later, in the administrative tower near the station's central hub, a place I had never had reason to visit in 4 years of working the docks below it. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed human woman named Dana Hollis, looked at me with open suspicion until I explained who I needed to see and why, and even then, she made me wait nearly 20 minutes before allowing me through. Soray's office was smaller than I expected, functional rather than grand, dominated by a wide window that looked out over the docking bays where I spent most of my working hours. She stood when I entered, something careful and controlled in her posture, as though she had trained herself not to hope too visibly for whatever answer I had come to give. "You came," she said. "I did," I said. "I've thought about it. A lot. More than I've thought about almost any decision in my life." "And?" I looked at her, at the careful stillness she was holding herself in, and I thought about Tavi's small hand in mine on the garden deck, and about the strange stillness I had found in that alley when the only thing that mattered was not letting go. "I want to understand it fully before I say anything else," I said. "Not the short version, all of it, what it means, what it asks of me, what it changes. If I'm going to say yes to forever, I want to know exactly what forever looks like." Something eased in Sorai's shoulders, not quite relief, not quite anything else I could name yet, but close to both. "That is fair," she said. "That is more than fair. Sit, I will tell you everything." And she did. She told me about the Kaethadari's origins, a tradition older than the Kelvarin's arrival among the stars, born from a time when their people were smaller, more fragile, more dependent on rare acts of outside protection to survive at all. She told me how the bond worked, not as ownership, not as servitude, but as a formal, unbreakable inclusion into a family's line, carrying rights and responsibilities in both directions. I would have a place in her household. I would have a voice in decisions concerning Tavi's upbringing. I would be recognized, under Kelvarin law, as kin, with all the protection and standing that carried among her people. I would also, she explained carefully, be expected to remain near them, not imprisoned, not confined, but bound in a way that meant long absences would strain the bond in ways neither of us could easily undo. It was not slavery. It was not marriage, not exactly, though she admitted the lines blurred in ways her own language handled more gracefully than mine did. It was something older and stranger than either, built for a purpose humans had never needed to build anything similar for, because humans, she said, quietly and without any bitterness I could detect, seemed to volunteer for exactly this kind of sacrifice without any law forcing them into it at all. "You make it sound like you envy that," I said. "I do," Stori admitted. "It is a strange thing, to build careful laws and rituals around trying to encourage in ourselves what your people seem to simply carry, unprompted, in your nature. I do not fully understand it. I am not certain your own people fully understand it either, but I have seen it now, with my own eyes, and I find I cannot look away from what it means." I sat with that a long moment, watching the ships move slowly through the docking bay below her window, small and steady against the vast dark beyond the station's shell. "There's something you should know," I said finally. "I didn't do what I did in that alley because I wanted anything from it. I still don't. If I agree to this, I need you to understand that whatever comes next has to be something we both actually want, not something either of us feels obligated to accept because of what happened." "I understand that completely," Stori said. "I would not have it any other way." "Then I need time," I said, "not to decide if I care about Tavi. I already know I do. I need time to understand what it means to build a life around a bond like this. Honestly, without pretending it's simple just because my heart already leans toward yes." Stori studied me for a long moment, something soft moving behind her violet eyes. "Take whatever time you need," she said. "The offer does not expire. It cannot expire. That is the nature of what it is." I left her office that day without an answer, but for the first time since waking in that pale, unfamiliar room, I did not feel like I was standing at the edge of something frightening. I felt, instead, like I was standing at the edge of something enormous and unfinished, waiting patiently for me to grow into whatever shape it needed me to become. I did not know yet how little time I would actually have to make that decision, or how quickly the world outside that quiet office would force my hand. The trouble started the way most trouble does, quietly, through a door I did not even know had opened. I was called into the station's administrative office on a Tuesday, 10 days after my conversation with Stori, by a man named Callum Ashford, who introduced himself as a liaison for human affairs on Halden Station. He was polished in a way that made me instantly wary, the kind of polish that came from practice rather than comfort, and he wasted no time getting to the point once his office door had closed behind us. "Word travels fast among the Kelverin community," he said, settling behind his desk with the ease of a man who assumed every room belonged to him by default. "Faster than I would like, frankly. I understand Counselor Vantik has extended you an offer, the HFY. That's not really station business," I said carefully. "Everything involving a human and a binding claim on Kelverin territory is station business," Ashford said, folding his hands together. "Do you understand what you would be if you accept this? Not just family to one counselor's household. You would be the first human ever formally bound into a Kelverin family line. Do you understand what that means for how every Kelverin faction on this station, and beyond it, will look at humans going forward?" I had not, honestly, thought that far ahead. I had been thinking about Tavi's hand in mine, and Soray's careful, patient explanations, and the strange, steady pull I felt toward a life I barely understood yet. I had not been thinking about factions, or precedent, or whatever larger game Ashford seemed to think was being played around me. "I'm not doing this for anyone's politics," I said. "I did what I did because a kid needed help. Whatever happens after that is between me and Tavi's family. Nothing that changes the shape of an entire diplomatic relationship stays between two families," Ashford said, not unkindly, but with the flat certainty of a man who had seen enough politics to know it as fact rather than opinion. "I am not here to stop you. I want to be clear about that. If anything, my office sees real value in this. A human bound formally into Kelverin kinship could open doors that have been closed to us for a decade. Trade doors, cultural doors, doors that matter far beyond this station." "So you want me to do it," I said, "because it's useful to you." "I want you to understand the weight of it," Ashford said. "Whichever way you decide, you will not be deciding quietly. People will watch. Some will resent you for it. Some will try to use you for it. I would rather you walk into that with open eyes than stumble into it believing this only concerns you and one grateful family." I left his office with a headache building behind my eyes and a weight settling over my chest that had not been there before. He was right, and I hated that he was right, because it meant the simple thing I had done in that alley, the thing that had felt so clear and uncomplicated in the moment, was already being pulled apart and repurposed by people who had never been there to see how simple it actually was. The Kelverin side of the complication arrived 2 days later, and it arrived with considerably less politeness than Ashford had managed. I was leaving the dock at the end of a long shift when a Kelverin man intercepted me at the transit platform, tall and sharp-featured, dressed in formal robes that marked him as someone of standing within the community. He did not introduce himself right away. He simply stood in my path, violet eyes narrowed, and spoke in clipped, precise English that carried an edge I did not need a translator to understand. "You are the human," he said, "the one Stori Vantik intends to bind into her line." "I haven't decided anything yet," I said. "You should decide against it," the man said. "My name is Counselor Perrin Ask. I sit on the same council as Stori Vantik. I have sat on that council for longer than you have been alive. I will tell you plainly what I think of this, since I doubt she has been fully honest with you about the opposition you will face." "I'm listening," I said, mostly because arguing with him in the middle of a crowded transit platform did not seem like it would end well for anyone. "The HFY has not been invoked in living memory for good reason," Ask said. "It is a relic of a weaker age, when our people needed outside protection to survive at all. We are not that people any longer. To invoke it now, with a human, publicly, is to declare to every other faction watching that Kelverin's strength has diminished so far that we must bind ourselves to your kind for safety. It is an embarrassment. It weakens Sorai's standing on the council, and by extension, it weakens all of us." "That's not what this is," I said. "This isn't about weakness. It's about a promise she made because of what happened to her daughter." "Sentiment," Ask said, the word sharp with dismissal, "is a poor foundation for law that will outlive both of you. I am not asking you to care about council politics. I am telling you that if you accept this bond, You will not simply be gaining a family. You will be stepping into the middle of a fight that has nothing to do with the child you saved, and everything to do with power neither of us fully controls." He left without waiting for a response, robes sweeping behind him as he disappeared into the crowd, and I stood on that platform a long time after he was gone, feeling the weight of everything Ashford and Askett had both, in their own very different ways, tried to warn me about. I did not tell Stori about either conversation right away. I needed to sit with it first, to understand what I actually felt underneath all the noise other people were determined to layer over my decision. I went back to my apartment that night and sat at my small kitchen table for hours, staring at nothing, turning the last month over and over in my mind. It was Owen who finally cut through the noise, 3 days later, when he found me staring blankly at a maintenance panel I was supposed to be repairing instead of actually repairing it. "You've been somewhere else for weeks," he said, setting down his tools and leaning against the wall beside me. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready, but you look like you're about to snap something important, and I'd rather it not be your own head. What's going on?" I told him. All of it. The alley, the beating, the Kayathadari, Ashford's politics, Ask's warning. Owen listened without interrupting, which was rare for him, and when I finished he was quiet for a long moment, turning a wrench over slowly in his hands. "You know what I think," he said finally, "for whatever it's worth, which admittedly isn't much against counselors and diplomats. Tell me anyway. I think you're letting everyone else's reasons crowd out your own," Owen said. "Ashford wants you to do it because it helps him. Ask wants you not to do it because it threatens him. Neither of them actually asked what you want. So I'm asking. Forget the politics for 1 minute. What do you want?" I thought about Tavi's hand in mine on the garden deck. I thought about the way she had said, so simply, that I had already stayed with her when it was hard, and that was what mattered most. I thought about Stori's careful patience, her honesty about the weight of what she was offering, the quiet hope she had not quite managed to hide behind her formal explanations. "I want to be there for them," I said, and hearing myself say it out loud made the truth of it settle somewhere solid in my chest. Not because a law says I have to be, not because it's useful to anyone else, just because I want to be. "Then that's your answer," Owen said. "Everything else is noise. Let them argue about politics after you've already made your choice. Don't let them make it for you." I went to Stori's office the next morning, before my shift, still wearing my work clothes, my hands still faintly smelling of engine grease. She looked up from her desk in surprise when I arrived unannounced, and something in her expression shifted when she saw my face, as though she already sensed what I had come to say. "I've had 2 very different people try to talk me into 2 very different decisions this week," I told her, standing in the doorway. "One wanted me to say yes, because it would open doors for humans on this station. One wanted me to say no, because it would embarrass your standing on the council. I listened to both of them, and I thought about it for days, and I realized something." "What did you realize?" Stori asked quietly. "Neither of them actually mattered," I said. "Not really. Not next to the only thing that actually does matter, which is a little girl who climbed into my bed because she was scared I wouldn't come back, and a mother who was honest with me about exactly what she was asking, even when honesty made it harder for me to say yes." I crossed the room and stood in front of her desk, and for the first time since that night in the alley, I felt completely certain about something. "I want to say yes," I said, "not because of what it means for anyone else, because of what it means for the 3 of us. I want to be Tavi's family. I want to be yours, if you'll still have me, knowing everything I know now about how complicated this is going to be." Stori rose slowly from behind her desk, and for a long moment she simply looked at me, something bright and careful moving behind her violet eyes. "You understand," she said, "that saying yes will not end the difficulty. Ask and those who agree with him will not simply accept this quietly. There will be resistance. There may be danger, though I did not want to burden you with that possibility until you had already chosen freely, without fear shaping your decision. I've already been beaten in an alley for this family once," I said. I'm not planning on running from whatever comes next. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile touched the corner of Soray's mouth, the first real softness I had seen in her since that first frightened night. Then let us begin properly, she said. There is a ceremony. Formal, witnessed, binding under Kelveran law. It is not simple, and it is not private, no matter how much I might have wished it could be, given everything Ashford and Ask have already stirred up around us. But if you are certain, I will not delay it any longer. I'm certain, I said. We found Tavi in the garden deck that afternoon, where she seemed to spend every free hour she could negotiate, and when Soray told her, in careful Kelveran words I did not fully understand, what I had decided, the small girl let out a sound of pure delight and crossed the distance between us at a dead run, colliding into my legs with enough force to nearly knock me over. You are staying, she said, muffled against my jacket. Truly staying. Forever. Truly staying, I confirmed, kneeling down to her level, feeling something settle inside my chest that had been unsettled since the moment I first heard her scream in that alley. Forever. I did not yet know how soon that forever would be tested, or how the same forces that had first put Tavi in danger were not finished with her at all. But standing there on that garden deck, with a small hand gripping my sleeve, and a careful, hopeful woman watching the two of us with something like relief written across her face, I found I was not afraid of whatever came next. Whatever it was, I would meet it the same way I had met that alley, standing between them and the danger, for as long as I had breath to do it. The warning came 4 days before the ceremony, and it came from the last person I expected. Dana Hollis, the sharp-eyed receptionist from Soray's office building, caught me in the corridor outside my apartment on the lower ring, out of breath, as though she had run the entire way from the transit platform. I probably shouldn't be here, she said, glancing over her shoulder, before stepping inside when I opened the door wider. I process a lot of paperwork that crosses Ashford's desk. Most of it's boring, some of it isn't. What did you find? I asked, already feeling the old tightness returning to my chest. A transfer request, Dana said. Filed 2 weeks ago, quietly, under a shell contract. Security personnel reassigned off Halden Station, right around the time those men jumped Tavi in that alley. I didn't think much of it at first. Reassignments happen all the time. But then I found a second document, a payment record. Someone paid those men to be in that alley that night, waiting for a Kelveran child to pass through alone. The floor seemed to tilt slightly under my feet. You're telling me it wasn't random. I'm telling you someone wanted a Kelveran counselor's daughter hurt, or taken, badly enough to pay for it, Dana said. And I'm telling you the money trail leads somewhere I didn't expect. Not human. Not Kelveran either, exactly. Somewhere in between. A faction that doesn't want to see any bond form between our peoples. Not the Kathadari. Not trade. Not anything. Why would anyone want that badly enough to hurt a child over it? I asked. Because bonds like the one you're about to enter change the balance of power, Dana said. Ashford was right about that much, even if he only cared about the parts that helped him. If a human becomes formally kin to a Kelveran council family, it sets precedent. Other humans will be watched more closely for the same kind of bond. Other Kelveran will start seeing humans differently. Whoever paid for that alley wanted to stop this before it started, and when it happened anyway, when you got in the way, I think they've only gotten more determined, not less. I did not sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Tavi's small hand in mine, about the collar that had been broken before those men ever grabbed her, about how carefully arranged the whole thing suddenly looked once I stopped believing it had been a random act of cruelty. I went to Soray the next morning, and I told her everything Dana had found. I watched her face go through several careful transformations, fear and anger and something colder and more calculating settling over her features in turn, until she finally rose from her chair with a stillness that felt far more dangerous than any outburst could have been. I suspected as much, she said quietly. The men who attacked her were paid too well for street thugs acting alone. I did not want to believe it, because believing it means someone deliberately used my daughter as a target in a larger game, and no parent wants to accept that their child was never truly random prey. We need to protect her, I said. Now. Not after the ceremony. Now. Agreed, Stori said. And we need to find out who is behind this, before the ceremony gives them a much larger reason to try again. We were not given much time to plan. 2 days later, the evening before the ceremony was scheduled to take place, I was walking Tavi back from the garden deck when I felt it before I understood it, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck that something in the crowd around us had shifted. I had felt that same awareness once before, in a different life, in a different uniform, and I had learned a long time ago never to ignore it. Stay close to me, I told Tavi, tightening my grip on her hand. She must have heard something in my voice, because she did not argue, only pressed closer against my side as we moved through the crowded transit corridor. I scanned the faces around us, looking for anything wrong, any pattern that did not fit the ordinary flow of station traffic, and I found it in a man standing too still near the corridor's far exit, watching us with an intensity no casual traveler would ever wear. I changed direction immediately, pulling Tavi toward a side passage instead of the main corridor, and I saw the man react, speaking quickly into something at his collar before moving to follow. My pulse spiked, old instincts rising up through years of dust to take control of my movements. We're going to walk quickly now, I told Tavi, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. Like a game. Can you do that for me? Is it the bad men again? She asked, her voice small but steady, and something in that steadiness told me she was braver than most adults I had known. Maybe, I said honestly, but I'm right here. I'm not letting go. We moved through the side corridors of the lower ring, my mind racing through half-remembered layouts from years of working the docks, trying to find the fastest route back towards Soray's tower without crossing open, exposed spaces. Behind us, I could hear footsteps now, more than one set, moving with a purpose that had nothing casual about it. They caught up to us near the maintenance access at the edge of the cargo district, 3 of them this time, dressed like ordinary station workers, but moving with the same coordinated precision Ashford's polished office had warned me about without ever quite explaining. One of them had a weapon drawn before I even registered the threat had escalated that far. "Give us the child," the lead man said, "and you walk away from this. That's more than you got last time." I thought about the alley. I thought about the stillness I had found there, the certainty of standing between danger and someone who could not protect herself. I found that same stillness now, easier this time, because I already knew what it cost, and I had already decided it was worth paying. "No," I said simply, and pushed Tavi behind me, back toward the maintenance corridor we had just come from. "Run. Find your mother. I'll hold them." "I don't want to leave you," she said, her voice cracking with fear. "You have to," I said, kneeling briefly to meet her eyes, keeping my voice steady, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "I promised you forever, remember? This is part of keeping that promise. Go, now." She ran. I turned back to face the 3 men, alone, in a narrow corridor with nowhere left to retreat, and for a moment I thought the story was going to end the same way it had almost ended in that alley, except this time there would be no interruption, no mother arriving just in time. Then the corridor behind the men erupted with sudden light and motion, and I saw Owen come around the corner at a dead run, a length of pipe gripped in both hands, shouting something incoherent that was somehow still the most welcome sound I had ever heard. Behind him came 2 figures I recognized as Kelverin security, moving with a speed and precision that told me Soray's people did not waste time once alerted to danger. The fight that followed was short, chaotic, and over faster than I expected, the element of surprise breaking the confidence of men who had planned for an isolated target and found themselves outnumbered instead. I took a glancing blow across the shoulder before the last of them was subdued, but it was nothing compared to what the alley had cost me, and this time I was not alone in the middle of it. Soray arrived moments later, Tavi held tightly against her chest, both of them breathing hard from the run, and the look on her face when she saw me still standing, bruised but whole, was something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. "You stayed," she said, echoing her daughter's words from weeks before, as though the two of them shared some deeper understanding of what that meant, that went beyond simple language. "I told her I would," I said, my voice rough with adrenaline and something softer underneath it. "I meant it." We learned later, once the captured men were questioned by Kelveran's security and cross-referenced against the records Dana had risked her position to uncover, that the faction behind the attacks belonged to a splinter group opposed to any deepening ties between humans and Kelveran, humans and otherwise unwilling to see their careful isolation eroded by bonds like the one Stori and I were about to form. They had hoped to stop the Kayathadari before it could set any precedent at all, first by removing Tavi from the equation entirely, and when that failed, by trying again before the ceremony could be completed. They had underestimated one thing, over and over, in both attempts. They had underestimated how far I was willing to go to make sure they failed. Standing in that corridor, bruised but upright, with Tavi's small arms wrapped tightly around my legs, and Sori's hand resting, warm and steady, against my shoulder, I understood something I had not fully understood before. This was not a debt anymore. It had not been a debt for a long time, if it had ever truly been one. This was simply who I had chosen to become, the moment I stepped into that alley without knowing what it would cost me. And I would keep choosing it, over and over, for as long as they needed me to. The ceremony took place the following evening, delayed only long enough for the station's security office to finish its initial questioning of the men who had attacked us, and held in a hall I had never known existed, tucked deep within the Kelveran district on the upper ring of the station. I stood at the entrance in borrowed formal clothing, feeling entirely out of place among the tall gray-skinned figures gathered inside, all of them dressed in the same fine dark robes Counselor Ask had worn the day he confronted me at the transit platform. Ask himself stood near the front of the hall, arms folded, his expression carefully neutral in a way that told me he had not changed his mind about any of this, only accepted that his objections had not been enough to stop it. Owen stood near the back with Dana, both of them looking almost as out of place as I felt, though Owen wore the moment with his usual stubborn grin, nudging me forward when I hesitated at the threshold. "You didn't survive an alley and a corridor full of armed men just to get nervous about a hallway full of formally dressed diplomats," he said. "Go on, they're waiting for you." I walked the length of the hall alone, every eye in the room following my progress, until I reached the raised platform at the far end where Stori stood waiting, dressed in robes the color of deep water, her violet eyes finding mine and holding them steady the entire way. Tavi stood beside her, small and solemn in her own formal clothing, though the careful composure she was clearly trying to maintain cracked the moment I got close enough, breaking into a wide, uncontainable smile that undid every bit of the ceremony's gravity in an instant. An elder Kelveran woman stood at the center of the platform, holding a shallow bowl filled with something that glowed faintly silver, and she began speaking in slow, formal Kelveran, words I could not understand but felt the weight of anyway, carried in the cadence and the stillness of every person listening. When she finished, she turned to me, and Stori leaned close to translate quietly, her breath warm against my ear. "She asks if you come to this bond freely," Stori murmured, "without coercion, without expectation of gain, understanding fully what it will ask of you for the rest of your life." "Tell her yes," I said. "Tell her I've never been more certain of anything." Stori relayed the words, and the elder's expression softened slightly, something like approval crossing her ancient face before she turned to Stori and asked the same question in return. I watched Sori's throat move as she swallowed, watched the careful composure she had maintained through weeks of politics and danger finally, briefly, crack open into something raw and honest. "Yes," she said, in English this time, loud enough for the whole hall to hear, loud enough that I understood she wanted me to hear it most of all. "Freely, completely, for as long as I draw breath." The elder dipped 2 fingers into the glowing bowl and pressed them first to my forehead, then to Sori's, then finally, gently, to Tavi's, murmuring words that felt less like ceremony and more like a blessing carried down through generations of people who understood, better than most, exactly what it meant to finally find the protection they had spent so long being unable to provide for themselves. When it was done, the hall erupted into a sound I did not have a word for, not quite applause, something warmer and stranger, a low resonant hum that seemed to rise from every Kelvaran throat at once, a sound of celebration older than any language I knew. Tavi threw herself forward, wrapping her arms around my waist with all the fierce joy a small body could hold, and Soray's hand found mine, fingers lacing together, with a certainty that told me every careful formality between us had finally given way to something simpler and far more real. Ask approached afterward, once the crowd had begun to disperse into quiet conversation and warm congratulations I only half understood, his expression still guarded but no longer hostile in the way it had been on that transit platform weeks before. "I still believe this sets a precedent our people were not ready for," he said, addressing Soray first, then turning his violet eyes to me. "But I watched what you did in that corridor. I have reviewed the reports. Whatever my reservations about the law itself, I cannot deny what you have shown yourself willing to do for a child who is not your blood. Perhaps our people were not ready for this bond. Perhaps we needed it anyway." It was not quite an apology, but it was more than I had expected from him, and I found I did not need more than that. Some battles were not worth fighting to the finish. This one, at least, seemed willing to end in something close to peace. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm I could not have imagined for myself even a month before. I kept my work at the docks, though Soray's household staff insisted, gently but persistently, on making sure I never returned to an empty apartment on the lower ring again. My old apartment sat mostly unused now, a place I visited occasionally out of habit more than need, while my evenings filled instead with Tavi's homework, her endless questions about human customs and human food and human stories, and Soray's quiet company once the day's council business finally released her. Owen visited often, delighted in a way he did not bother hiding to have talked his way into being, as he put it, honorary uncle to the first human ever bound into a Kelvaran family line. Dana visited too, less often, though Soray made a point of formally thanking her for the risk she had taken, a gesture that seemed to embarrass Dana more than any danger ever had. I thought often, in those quiet evenings, about the version of myself who had walked home hungry and tired one ordinary night, thinking of nothing more complicated than dinner and sleep. That version of me had no idea what waited in that alley, no idea that a single decision made without hesitation would rewrite the entire shape of his life. I did not regret a single moment of what it had cost me to become the person standing here now, bruised in places that had long since healed, bound permanently to a family I had not known existed a season before. One evening, months after the ceremony, I found Soray standing at the wide window of her office, watching the same slow traffic of ships moving through the docking bay that she had been watching the first day I came to give her my answer. Tavi was already asleep down the hall, worn out from a day spent chasing station cats through the garden deck with Owen, who had apparently decided teaching a Kelvaran child terrible human games was a solemn uncle's duty. "You are thinking about something," Soray said, without turning from the window. "That alley," I admitted, coming to stand beside her. "I keep thinking about how close I came to walking past it, how different everything would be if I just kept walking, told myself it wasn't my problem, let someone else handle it." "But you did not walk past it," Soray said, finally turning to look at me, her violet eyes soft in the low evening light of the office. "You stopped, you stayed, you endured what came, and you did not let go, and because of that, everything that followed became possible. I didn't do it for any of this," I said. "I want you to know that. I didn't save her hoping for a family, or a bond, or any of it. I just couldn't walk past a kid who needed help." "I know," Soray said, and there was something fierce and grateful in the way she said it, something that told me she had understood that truth from the very first moment she found me curled around her daughter in that alley, bruised and unwilling to let go. "That is exactly why it means what it means. You gave everything before you knew there would ever be anything given back. That is not a debt in the end. It never truly was. It is simply who you are. I thought about that for a long moment, watching the ships drift slowly past the window, small points of light against the endless dark beyond the station's shell. I told Tavi I wasn't going anywhere, I said finally. I meant it then. I mean it more now than I did the day I said it. Soray's hand found mine again, the same certain warmth I had felt the night of the ceremony, and she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, a small gesture that carried more weight than any formal ceremony ever could. Forever, then, she said quietly. Forever, I agreed. Outside the window, the station continued its endless quiet motion, ships coming and going, lives crossing paths in ways none of them could predict, each ordinary moment carrying the possibility of becoming something extraordinary if only someone was willing to stop and stay and endure whatever came next for the sake of someone who could not endure it alone. I had stopped, once, in an alley I nearly walked past. I had never once regretted it.